brand new wave, drowning out the noise it's tame. Liberty whispers through the brave, breaking free from every chain. Nullify the rules they crave, crypto beats that pave the way. Anarchy with minds that's safe, algorithms new dawn today. Out of bounds and out of sight, building futures pure and bright. Escape the grip and win the fight. Welcome into the legacy ride. Beyond control we take a stand, casting off the iron brand. Freedom flowing through our hands, revolution's our command. Decentralize the way we plan, all together we expand. Breaking shackles for the clan, in this journey we're unpanned. Out of bounds and out of sight, building futures pure and bright. Escape the grip and win the fight. Welcome into the legacy ride.
Welcome. I am the legacy of Jennifer Kaiser, and this is episode 60 of Legacy News. Welcome in.
To the legacy ride. Dan, 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 dan.
Do you think this is a joke?
I'm
you
a
think
joke.
that
Yeah.
Do you think that you're Bill Nye the Science Guy?
Oh, I always thought I was a little bit more than that. I thought I was an engineer.
Well, he really is an engineer. He's a smart guy.
Well, there you go.
So that's Andrew Joseph, everybody. I'm Zach Kaiser, and
At
we
large.
got an excellent ending today on the series Breaking Monero. So should we jump into it? It's kind of long, or do you have anything to say, Andrew?
Well, it's been very fun recording and watching over this and kind of commentating on it and answering Zach's questions. So I don't have that much else to say besides that. So let's get right into it. It's about 20 minutes, and it's going to be a good episode. So here we go.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Breaking Monero. Today, it's just with me, Justin. Sarang and Surrey are busy off doing other things. You'll have to catch them in a future episode. But today, I'm talking about a very important topic, subaddress association. I'm going to talk about two main types of subaddress association. Association that can be done off-chain and association that can be done on-chain based off transaction data and how you assume different subaddress entities are associated. Let's jump straight into the first one, which is something that in the Monero community we're calling the Janus attack. So let's look at this transaction graph, here. So let's say that Eve works for an employer that sells Chicago Cubs hats, and Eve also runs a side business, Entity One, that sells Chicago
Go
White
Cubbies.
Sox hats. Okay, huge no-no going on here, right? So let's say Eve's employer starts to become suspicious that Eve is running a side business. Eve's employer could generate a transaction that
This
sends
one's for
funds to
free.
the entity one. Suppose the entity one automatically processes
North
the
siders
transaction
over
as
south side.
any transaction
Hmm.
processing software would do. But if Eve's employer constructs a transaction in such a way that the entity one only receives it if both Eve's salary receiving address from the employer and the entity one payment acceptance address are derived from the same seed, then Eve's employer is able to learn some more information. So let me take a real small step back, summarize that again, because I know it got complicated. Eve's employer will try and determine whether or not the address that the employer uses to pay Eve's salary and the address provided by the entity one are generated, are derived from the same master Monero seed. To do so, Eve's employer can generate a transaction sent to entity one, but entity one only receives it if this subaddress with entity one and the subaddress sent to Eve for salary payment are controlled by the same seed. Eve's employer would know if this was the case if entity one, the payment processor component, processes the payment and continues on, then Eve's employer would know it was successful. If the entity one payment processor does not report receiving any transaction, Eve's employer would know that the funds that were sent to the entity one were lost forever, and the subaddresses that Eve controls personally and the subaddress used by the entity one were derived from two separate seeds. So let's go through so in this case, of course, Eve's employer was able to note that these two are related to the same seed. But let's go through the example where Eve is pretty smart and she uses a separate seed for entity one instead of the same seed. So, it's still related to Eve. That's what this gray line is for instead of the blue line. But instead of a subaddress, entity one has its entire own set of private keys, its own seed. So if Eve's employer tries to send a transaction to entity one that only goes through if Eve's personal subaddress is also part of the same seed, you would note that it would not go through, and therefore Eve's employer is not able to create this subaddress association. Let's take a look at it from a third example with exchange information. So suppose Eve this time wants to deposit funds on an exchange. So she opens up an exchange deposit account. The exchange gives Eve a deposit subaddress for her to use to identify payments that she makes on the exchange. However, let's say a subaddress comes across from a friend and she wants to know if this subaddress is an exchange subaddress, if it's provided by the same exchange. Well, what Eve could do is she could construct a transaction to herself, so she can send a transaction to her own subaddress that is provided by the exchange on the left there, but she can make it such that it's only received there if the second middle deposit subaddress is actually derived from the same seed also. So if Eve is able to notice that she sees funds show up in her account, she can confirm that the second subaddress she was provided is also an exchange account derived from the same seed. However, if she is not credited funds, she would know that they're lost forever and that the second subaddress is not associated with the exchange's same seed. So that's another way where at relatively little cost and by Eve providing her own confirm, because she is sending funds to herself essentially, that through the exchange, that she's able to learn or sort of scan subaddresses as they come in to see, again, at little cost, whether or not they're related to specific exchanges. Again, here you can see that if it was successful, she would know that the deposit address to is linked to an exchange. Now, I want to make one thing really, really clear, because I know a lot of people make this mistake. When I'm referring to subaddress association, I'm referring to the links between the identities that are behind the subaddresses. I am not referring to transactions that are associated with the subaddresses. This is really, really important. So if you're able to make associations like this between subaddresses, you still have no idea which transactions are associated with these subaddresses. So keep that in mind. That is still something that the attackers have no knowledge of. So what requirements are necessary to pull off a Janus attack? Well, so first, you need to know that Eve is using a subaddress that is connected to a single private key, or a single seed is an easier way to think about it. The accounts are irrelevant, so it doesn't matter how they're derived from the seed, whether it's a subaddress in one account or another account, as long as it's a subaddress from the seed, it's susceptible, so keep that in mind. Second, you have to know that the attacker is knowledgeable of the subaddress's existence in the first place and would have a reason to test it. You can't generate a subaddress on your computer, never give it to anyone else, and then be attacked because no one else knows what the subaddress is. So keep in mind who you're giving the subaddresses to. You may have far less exposure than you think. And then if that's the case, then the attacker would perhaps try to create a transaction that is received by Eve if both subaddresses are derived from the same seed. And then on the third point there has to be a confirm. So whether or not it is Eve confirming, yes, I received the transaction manually or programmatically, not pragmatically, or whether it's the case that it's the exchange issuance where the attacker is able to provide their own confirm because they have visibility over one of the subaddresses derived from the seed. There just needs to be some way to confirm it actually went through, because otherwise the transaction will be lost and there's no actual connection there. So those are the three things you need to focus on, the three attack requirements for the Janus attack to be successful in the current state of Monero. So what are some mitigations that users can do? Well, the first two are protocol level changes that Monero has not implemented, and there still is some debate over whether or not they should be implemented for efficiency reasons because they add additional transaction size. So the first is to encrypt the TX private key and send it as part of the transaction. The second option is to publish a Schnorr signature proving knowledge of the TX private key corresponding to the published TX public key on a specific base point. I'm not going to get into either of those specifics for this episode. This is supposed to be pretty simple. Sarang and Surrey will be able to answer questions along with several others in the Monero Research Lab IRC channel if you have additional questions there. However, in relation to things people can do right now, I've bolded a few of the main ones that people can do that are realistic. So first, if you can, do not confirm receipt of funds. If someone's like, hey, did I send funds to you? You don't necessarily have to say yes, right? So keep that in mind, that if you are not confirming receipt of funds and you're the only one that has access to subaddresses derived from that seed, then there's no way for an attacker to prove that these are actually associated. The fourth point here, if you really are one that is worried about the disassociation of your identities, let's say you're Eve and you're running a separate after work company, well, then you should be using seeds that are derived, completely different seeds, and you should be using subaddresses derived from different seeds depending on what identity you're trying to use. So definitely the best protection you can do now is to use separate seeds if you're willing to compromise on that usability front. Fifth point is just don't share exchange deposit subaddresses with others, right? Like, tell a friend to send funds to a subaddress that you control and then send it to the exchange. Otherwise, it's really trivial for most people to be able to test whether or not a subaddress is related to an exchange at relatively low cost. The sixth point is, in general, in addition to exchange subaddresses, you can just be mindful of who you're giving the subaddresses to. If they are people you generally trust, or they're people that you are more worried about, or they're more worried counterparties, you should consider using a different seed, such that they're not trying to, collude to connect some of your identities together, especially if you're negotiating under the pretense of it being a different identity. And then the seventh point is, there may be something else clever that we've thought of after this video came out, so certainly stay up to date in relation to how subaddresses provide protections and what they mean for ultimate users. because it's very likely that people have come up with some other solution that just hasn't come out before this video. So keep that in mind too. So just to help quell everyone's nerves, I'm going to walk through sort of the different levels of protections provided by different address uses for off-chain learning of information, because I know that people are like, wait, I thought subaddresses were like perfect and now they're not. So this helps clarify things for people. For most people, you don't need to worry. There's still a reasonable level of protection provided by subaddresses with a really lovely user experience. However, for the people who are willing to go a step further, you still have the option of using a separate seed, and we'll talk about what those specific benefits are. So if you are reusing your main address that starts with 4, or you are using an integrated address, integrated addresses are derived from the main address, so everyone is able to derive the main address when given an integrated address. So if you give one integrated address to one person and another one to another user, they're able to know they're the same main address. Then they might provide some protection against a passive observer, right? It would only be known if you publish it publicly, let's say. If you don't publish it publicly and you only deal with counterparties, well, then perhaps you don't even need to worry. However, once you start dealing with counterparties, whether malicious or not, they're able to determine, hey, I've seen this address before. Like, I know who gave it to me in the past. Now I know you're giving it to me. So I'm able to connect these identities together based off the address that these people have provided. So for any type of counterparty interaction, you're much, much better off using subaddresses. And you're still better off using them against passive observers too, if you're publishing addresses online, for instance, because the passive observers are less likely to receive access to information. Now, for the malicious counterparty component, this is someone who is actively trying to learn more information about you and are willing to burn funds in the process. Subaddresses might not be the best case when you're interacting with these malicious counterparties. However, of course, it depends on what access to information these counterparties have. If they know the subaddress they use to pay you, but they don't know of any other of your subaddresses, I mean, there's no other identity that they can reasonably try and link to you. So it's dependent on the access to information there, the availability of information to this malicious counterparty. However, if you are concerned that malicious counterparties are able to get access to several different subaddress information and are willing to test those, you should be separating your different identities by using separate seeds as possible. That provides the highest degree of protection against malicious counterparties. But of course, it's kind of frustrating to log into many different Monero accounts. And so for most users, subaddresses still are a really, really good way to help manage your OPSEC. You have to remember, a few years ago with Monero, everyone was using integrated addresses and subaddresses weren't a thing. So subaddresses still provide an enormous user experience benefit for users OPSEC over what previous solutions were available, where it was just perhaps unrealistic for a user to have a separate seed all the time, right? So now that we've talked about the off-chain subaddress association, let's talk about some of the on-chain stuff. So you will note that this looks very, very similar to the poisoned output attack, and that's because it does effectively function the same way. Let's say Eve up here is sending funds to a large number of subaddresses, and Alice controls all of these subaddresses, and Eve is sort of suspicious, let's say, and wants some on-chain data to help prove that Alice is associated with these subaddresses. In this case, we're going to have Eve collaborate with an exchange. So this is very, very similar to the EAE attack that we described in the previous episode. So let's say Eve sends funds to one account, so to one subaddress that is selling Chicago Cubs hats, and there are several transactions that each use this ultimate resolve, this output that she sent, and then one of them Alice transfers to the exchange there. Let's say then that Eve sends a second transaction to a Chicago White Sox store that goes to Alice, and then Alice deposits on her exchange account, then a St. Louis account, and then finally, a Minneapolis Twins account. So or Twin Cities account. So in this case, if Eve's able to work with the exchange, they might say, okay, the likelihood that these subaddresses all are connected to one person depositing funds on the exchange makes it very clear that Alice is the individual or entity that has very likely control over all of these subaddresses. So that's some way that Eve and the exchange are able to work together to learn more information. Now let's sort of take the exchange out of it. I'll still keep the exchange on the slide for convenience, but let's say Eve is just generally curious and Alice is a little bit less intelligent in this example. So Eve is going to send the same transactions as before, but Alice takes all of these accounts, all the funds that they received, and combines them in a single transaction, like groups all the outputs together before sending it to the exchange. Well, then Eve might say, okay, what is the likelihood that a single transaction contains all of the outputs that I sent to all of these different subaddresses, and that they were all included in distinct individual rings? The money sent to the Cubs subaddress is in one ring, the Sox subaddress is in another ring. Like, this is not likely to happen by chance. And so Eve might use that as evidence to state that Alice is, or all of these 4 accounts are related to one shared entity based on the way that the transaction graph appears, based off the way that Alice constructed these transactions. So again, in this particular example, Eve might not even know Alice's identity necessarily, but Eve would know based off the transaction graph information that there is some likely connection between these 4 different stores. They're likely owned by a shared entity. All right, so we've gone over the basics. I want to end with a summary here. So first, subaddresses are better at providing unlinkability than integrated addresses, but they're not perfect. And power users should use addresses derived from independent seeds for the best privacy, but this does come at the cost of convenience. So just know what the limitations are. If you are sort of dealing with higher risk things with Monero, you should certainly understand what the limitations are and be willing to use separate seeds as needed in order to keep your identities distinct. And then the third point is really important, and this comes, this is related to the on-chain transaction graph stuff I'm talking about. For the on-chain stuff, it wasn't a direct subaddress link that impacted users and related it to one entity. Instead, it was what the entity did on-chain with their transactions that linked these subaddresses together. So subaddresses alone don't magically remove the concerns with on-chain matching. All of the concerns that we've talked about in the past episodes of Breaking Monero, and I'm sure we'll talk about in future other episodes too. So they're a really effective tool that can be beneficial to help prevent unlinkability, but they don't solve the problem entirely. There's many things that work together to help attackers learn information about transactions. So keep all of these things in mind. You might be setting transactions just among trusted counterparties, but an outside observer might know that the graph looks weird, and so they might be able to use that as useful information. The fourth point I want to emphasize is that stealth addresses function as desired for most use cases. So in terms of subaddresses I meant to say subaddresses there, not stealth addresses, in both of those cases. So subaddresses do in fact really, really help to allow normal users, casual users of Monero, have much better OPSEC than using integrated addresses at very, very low effort. So for all of those users, you can carry on pretty well assured knowing that this is a relatively niche attack and that subaddresses probably are providing the types of protections that you're hoping for. And then the fifth case is, just very basic. Don't share exchange addresses, subaddresses, because there's no reason to. Just use your own subaddress as an intermediary if needed, and then take note of who you give your subaddresses to that are derived from specific seeds. If you have some idea of what your type of subaddress exposure is, it can help you manage it a lot better. All right, so that's all I wanted to cover today for this episode of Breaking Monero. I know we've covered some pretty interesting stuff today, at least in my opinion, some off and on-chain transaction association and sub-address association. So I had a fun time, and I hope that you enjoyed it. We'll catch you in the next episode of Breaking Monero. Take
Are you scared?
You
If that
should
doesn't
be.
get you to stay in our fiat system, I don't know what will.
Oh,
What
it's like playing hopscotch, man. You know, if you can kind of anticipate where people are going to jump to, then you got a better chance of tracking them.
What are you, a little girl?
Oh.
Are you playing hopscotch? Do you use the little
Every
pebble
day.
too? So
That's
you
how I
can
lose all
skip?
the weight. That's how I lose all the weight. Screw
Mm,
walk-ins. Screw jumping jacks. Hopscotch is where it's at.
but you jumping jacks.
Yeah,
I
man.
hike. I hike.
Okay. He's a real
Mm,
man.
I am a real man. So, he lost me very, very early on. I got a little confused. All the information that was coming at me. But one thing that got me thinking though is how exactly does the a sub address association work for if I want to use the Monero exchange in a business that I was starting?
Well, it's like this. Like I said, they don't know for sure. They have to have some concrete evidence, some metadata, whatever you want to call it, so a little advanced knowledge about your habits and activities, about who you know what you do with the money, and so that's what this is one way to like a pinpoint to pressure test and see if they can narrow you down and see what you're doing with the money. You know, they're trying to get rid of your privacy, and this is, like I said, this is one way of doing it. And like I said, it's like hopscotch, right? They're just trying to throw the pebbles to see if you're going to land there, and to trace
I'm
where you're going.
I'm getting into XMR because I want privacy. So why would I want to use a sub address?
Well, a sub address is it's not perfect, but for most use cases, it can help in the fact that you know you have it's a smaller layer of privacy, but it's still a push towards privacy.
Why can't I just, if I was running a business, why can't I use under my business name for all transactions a direct address to my business's key
Well,
without letting
you
anybody
can, but
know? Obviously.
you can, but let me put it this way: uh, in a Bitcoin Cash network, they have it set up. There's a way to like forward transactions automatically with the Bitcoin.com wallet, and like
Mm.
they call it the Bitcoin Cash Register uh, app. I think it's been a while since they advertised it. But say you wanted you ran a bar, right? And people wanted to pay you in Monero or Bitcoin Cash or whatever it is, it automatically forwards it to the next address. And so that you may have taken the money, right? But it's not there. It's been located somewhere else as a safety mechanism, so that people can't steal from you.
But Bitcoin.com can steal from me. They really wanted to.
Well, I mean that's why they open source the wallets. So people can go through and see if people are actively trying to steal, you know,
Mm.
from the wallet. And
Sounds good.
they do a lot. They do a lot of work behind the scenes. They do what is called a source code audit of not only their stuff but of Bitcoin Cash the source code, and that stuff is expensive. They don't mess around.
Define expensive.
Well, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's at least $50,000 to $60,000 every time that the source code is audited for errors. You're on mute. You're on mute. Sorry. Let me see if I can pull up an audit of it real quick. Hold on.
I don't really care.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was trying to find it real quick.
Don't Jamie this podcast.
Okay.
I want to know from you. Dive deep in that big brain of yours. What do you remember? You can find this shit online, by the way. Are you frozen or? Oh,
I was
okay.
frozen for a second there. Sorry.
Mm.
Psychic
So,
powers.
Well, the thing I ask is not a whole lot of people are going to want to gravitate towards something that they fear is going to still give them less privacy. You get what I'm
Yeah.
saying? To the lame person, the reason they would want to get into any type of transaction seeking, any type of exchange on the blockchain, they're doing so because they feel they need privacy, they want privacy, and we don't have that privacy in the open surface world. So how do you get the lame people? And I don't mean that you're lame, everybody. I mean that you're simplistic in your form. You're smart as smart can be. We all have intelligence in our own right. But how do we get those that are in the lame category to acknowledge that you got to be a little open within the blockchain in some regard so that you can be relatively secure in your transactions on chain?
It really just depends. Like the way I can put it is this way: people are early adopters for TVs, right? And there's a high cost for adopting the technology early, but you also get a better reward because of better user experience. When people aren't comfortable with software like this, they wait for the middlemen to come in and build for them, so that it becomes more comfortable for them to do so.
Who wants to use a
And,
middleman?
and
Go direct to the
well, I
source.
mean, people who it's difficult sometimes to use Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these other cryptos, because there's a learning curve behind trying to use it. So it's easier for there's an app on the app store, that I could just scan it at the grocery store and pay it that way. That's 1,000 times easier than connecting a hardware wallet and then connecting that to MetaMask, and that MetaMask is going through a VPN to an exchange over in Taiwan or something like that. And I'm gonna buy this really rare, expensive token that I'm sure is going to moon in 20 days. It's people would rather just put it down and not think about it instead of actively try to figure something out.
Speaking of MetaMask, behind the scenes, I'm gonna ask for your help to try to see how I can integrate my hard wallet with a MetaMask account. I need to set that up.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, with that, I think we've depleted our resources on that. I don't think we have a whole lot to say. I mean, privacy is key.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to, not only is privacy key, but there are substitutes. So there are trade-offs in everything that you do. So you're gonna have to give away a little bit of privacy for some security.
I mean, that is one particular negotiation, I guess you could say.
I mean, look at the. I mean, just go back. Don't take my word for it. Go back to his chart, his pictograph that he showed. I mean, integrated address, so vulnerable. By the way, private key at the bottom, which is relatively fully safe because that's with you, unless you give away your key like a retard. But in the middle, you have that little sliver of yellow, all green, a little sliver of yellow in that bar. Basically, just means it's not perfect. It's just nothing's perfect unless you have the key
It's
on hand with yourself and you don't give it up to anybody like a moron. I mean, it's with you, but the sub address is not always going to be with you. It's interlinked with you, with your addresses, your keys, but
no
it's not yours per
no
se.
system is perfect. Like the Xbox 360, they just took that offline a little while ago, and you can't like connect to the store or anything like that. And after that happened, they were able to completely break the security on the Xbox 360. And that's not the only example. I mean, the Wii had a only Bluetooth connected version, and the longer things run, the more at risk the technology is, because more people can, sit down and try new advanced attack mechanisms.
Mm.
So it's always about evolving and trying to move forward as technology, because you're never going to have 100% security.
And speaking of evolving, we are trying to evolve as well. So if you like our content, go ahead and support us. I promise you, it's not going to be empty. It's not going to be empty fairly soon. We will get you other content for your eyes if you support. So, and even other content where we want you to be involved with as well. So just think,
You too could
think
high
tanks,
five Sean.
think tanks. We could have our own virtual think tanks, everybody. If you just support, just give us some support. We can start planning out. We could have our own think tanks. We could be better than the Washington think tanks. But regardless, if you like our content, just for less than half of a small, or whatever they call it at Starbucks coffee, because it's like $5 or $6 now. Hell, it's probably $15 now for a small.
Indeed.
But yeah, but for just $2.50, you can support. You can just hand us some support, and then we can put it into Monero.
You could seed my hair plugs.
Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, that's all I had. That's all I had. One more thing. One more thing. They're called If by Whiskey podcasts. Every Mondays, live streamed at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, right now in Arizona time while we're in daylight savings time. But check out Mark Pools and Jason of Drop the Mask. Very interesting stuff. They dive into it deep, give you their twist of perspective of all the things that are going on in the world. And they dive into philosophy, psychology, anything that your little heart wants to get knocked conscious for. So why don't you drop the mask, get knocked conscious, sit back, and take a shot of whiskey and enjoy If by Whiskey every Mondays at 8 p.m. Rumble, X, and YouTube. YouTube over on Not Conscious podcast. Other than that,
Nice.
I had to do that. I had to drop that effectively with all the
Cut the
with the
promo.
Rumble rant. With all the Rumble rants that they've been helping us with. I figured they're basically a sponsor at this point, right? So,
I think so.
but check them out. Check them out, and don't forget League of Ordinary Friends. Not really a scheduled concept, so it's not every month, once a month, every month, but it is something that we try to get together and do. So I don't know if we have one for this month. I don't think we do. So, but we will be back with League of Ordinary Friends. So
Sounds good.
but other than that, anything more on sub addresses, their associations, security protocols, Monero in general, to continue out? We're hitting the 40-minute mark.
No, I think we've covered enough for one show. So thanks for watching, guys.
Yeah, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, follow us everywhere. And why is there? What the fuck is he doing now, dude? He's standing
Sir?
behind you. Stop unzipping your pants, you dirty old man.
Help. He's got a
Yo.
gun, and it's not a Glock.
Oh shit. Stop unzipping your pants. Stop. Don't take those trousers down. Don't you dare take those trousers down, you sick.
I'm going to have to leave now, but I was sure I came in by that door over there. Hey, man, where's the door to get out of here?
Oh, it's right over there, sir.
Right over where?
The exit sign? Exit sign? It's that door right there.
That red sign?
Yeah, just go right that way.
Okay.
I think it went down the wrong door.
Where am I? Hey, what the fuck's wrong with you? That's not the right door.
Sir, you're gonna want to go to the one, the exit. You went to the door to the side there. That's
I went to the right doors. Where you pointed me to, you fuck.
I pointed you to the exit.
Man, you're fucking with the wrong guy.
I'm sorry.
You see this bulge on my hip? You know what that is?
That's a gun.
That's a Glock. You're fucking with the wrong guy.
Yeah.
Don't ever send